Okay, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome back to our last session of this semester for Sunoikis Digital Classics 2021. Today, this is our 15th session, and as we mentioned last week, this is our second session about digital Egyptology. Last week, we had a session with Rita Lucarelli and Franziska Naether about the Book of the Dead in 3D, but today we have another session in the broad field of digital Egyptology, but about papyrology and specifically about the Turin Papyrus online platform. And our guests today are Susanne Töpfer from the Egyptian Museum in Turin and Franziska Naether from the Saxon Academy of Sciences. As usual, you have the class outline in GitHub, where you have a complete description of this session with links and also with readings. So they are open access readings, so you can get more information about this session. And today, the goal of this session is to present this platform, so the work done at the Egyptian Museum in Turin for digitizing and collecting papyri. We also have other sessions in the past in Sunoikis, as you know, about digital papyrology, but today we have this opportunity to know more about this important collection of the Egyptian Museum in Turin. And I'm very, very grateful to Susanne because she accepted our invitation to join us today for this presentation. So I'm very happy that she's with us today. And Franziska, she will introduce this session. And she will also help with our discussion. So Susanne, Franziska, thank you for being with us today. And I think we can start with Franziska. Okay, and as usual, one thing, you know that for those of you following us on YouTube, please write your questions in the chat. Of course, we can also try to answer your questions during the presentation if this is the case, or otherwise we will have our final discussion, okay, after the presentation. But okay, no, so now, Franziska, please.
Thank you, Monica. Hello, everyone. Welcome to this final session of Sunoikis for this summer term, or wherever you're watching us. Maybe for you, it's winter term in the Southern Hemisphere. So welcome. And before we will kick off this session with Susanne's presentation of the new Turin database, as last week, I'm going to give you a few introductory remarks about Egyptological Digital Humanities project. If you've been watching last week, you already know how it's going along. I've been telling you a few things about material culture and new developments. And if you haven't, just check out that session. That's really great. Rita Lucarelli was our guest, who is working at the Egyptian collection at the Hearst Museum in Berkeley at the University of Berkeley. So go check that out from last one. And now today we have a more text-based approach with the database from Turin. Some of you who follow Sunoikis a little bit longer know that we have been talking already a couple of times about aspects of digital Egyptology. And my aim for the next roughly 5 to 10 minutes is to give you an overview of what has happened in the last year, to show you a couple of new projects that came up and interesting publications. So therefore, I'm going to share my screen right now and give you also browser links for a couple of things. And as usual, you will find this presentation after this session on our GitHub page. First of all, there's also a short session outline. I'm going to skip this briefly because this is something that Monica has already been mentioning. And I'm going to stop here briefly at the seminar reading, which was sort of required for today's session, an introduction to the new Papyrus online platform in Turin. And I'm going briefly to this website in order to show you one of the latest developments in open access publishing. So the journal of the Museo Egizio in Turin is one of those open access journals that came up in the last years. And this is a very fine way of museums disseminating their knowledge through their own open access journals. And usually they all deal with projects and objects from the collection in Turin, very nicely embedded into the frameworks and also having abstracts in Arabic. So if you are Egyptologist and work with material from Turin, please consider publishing with this journal, or others who work with collections, consider publishing open access, which is aiding us a great deal in scholarship, especially during the pandemic. I'm starting to say the same thing I said last week for material culture. We do have in Egyptology still a way to go to make our primary sources available. Some of the sources are, as for instance, through such journal articles available in open access. Others are behind closed walls. And we are in the text-based Egyptological project a little bit better on the way to standardize procedures, standardize the knowledge production, and have APIs, that means links for exchanging data, into the well-known frameworks that I've already also mentioned last week, the Wiki family. So that's the technology behind Wikipedia, or to our great player in our field, the Trismegistus database, who has also presented a couple of weeks ago here at Sunoikisis, or the Pleiades database, which is also a returning customer for Sunoikisis. So go check out these projects in the study course. A way to get to this kind of standardization and to look up what's already there is to go to Bartok. Bartok is the basic, or the Basel Register of Thesauri, Ontologies and Classification. And I'm doing this briefly with you. This is a very nice overview website. And for Egyptology, one of the main thesauri and ontology is Thoth. This has been developed basically by a database project called Ramses, and I mentioned this in a brief what this is about, and a couple of other scholars have also contributed to this. If you follow the links, then you'll get to this website of Thoth, the Thesaurus, nicely put together, the acronym. And if you have a look where my mouse is hovering, on the left-hand side of the screen, you can see, for instance, dates and dating systems, languages, and everything. And if you minimize these, you can see a couple of Egyptian periods, for instance, the Greco-Roman period. And if you go further, you also have the Hellenistic period. And then it's showing you those words in different languages or other names of it, people who have contributed this, but most importantly is the URI on top of it. So that's an identifier, a stable identifier to which you can refer if you have something, an object, a text referred to the Hellenistic period. And then you can make it clear for everyone what the Hellenistic period in Egyptology means, because we might know it, but we also might have scholarly debates about that, especially when it comes to periods of what is late antiquity, not going into this discussion here. But these thesauri, these ontologies help to make sure what it is. And then when you have a database, you would link to this URI that people can always check out what you want to tell them if you say Hellenistic period. For those more interested in the thing behind it, there is a vocabulary called SCOS, and this is a well-established framework within digital humanities and science in general. And then you can see there's also language, what is demotic, what is also the kind of scripts that we have, and then you can break it down to the different languages that we have. There's also Egyptien de tradition, this kind of Middle Egyptian that was used in later periods, demotic, and so on. Hieratic also is under the list of the scripts, so there's a couple of things you can find here. This is Thoth, the Thesaurus for Egyptology. Going briefly back, the main sources for looking up texts in the internet, in databases, is of course the TLA. We have mentioned this here a couple of times already, the Thesaurus Linguae Egyptiae, that's the pendant to the TLG for the Greek world, or the TLL for the Latinists. And it's looking still a bit retro in its design. That's why the colleagues also call this the legacy TLA. It has this 1990s style. And you know that some people already work in the interface in their internal framework with a much more modern design, and they also develop it for smartphones. But this is what we still have to deal with, and there's all the texts that are so far digitized in ancient Egyptian from all periods and from all kinds of genre, from decrees such as the Rosetta Stone to temple walls to walls of tombs to literary text, documentary text, magical text. So there's almost everything inside, and there's still large academy projects working for this right now. And if you need a nice introduction in English to that, I can recommend you the introduction, which is at the Ancient World Online. Chuck's blog, and there's really a good intro and a couple of links. The other project which has a lot of texts online is Ramses Online, the people who also work for the before mentioned thesaurus. This is a project conducted at the University of Liège in Belgium, and they of course collaborate with all the other colleagues and have people from all over the world helping in adding texts. And something to know for this database is that they also add morpholinguistic layers for analysis of the language, basically focusing on late Egyptian texts. So that means texts basically from the New Kingdom. Switching back to the TLA, there's a couple of news that can be announced which have happened since the last years. First of all, if you want to have a basic introductory reading, go to the volume that Monica and I edited in 2016 from the conference that we had in Leipzig a year earlier. So there is a link for an open access publication about the TLA. And the TLA has also a new entry, which makes it a little bit more user-friendly, a little bit more open to the public, called SAE, Science in Ancient Egypt. And we have a look at this one as well. Nicely put on a new framework here in Leipzig at the Saxon Academy of Sciences. Has a German and an English website, tells you all about the project and the domains of knowledge that it's treating. For instance, the medical science, magical text, mathematics, geography and topography, botany and zoology. Those are things that will be added later, or lexicography and philology. And I have selected for you a text that has already been added to this platform, Science in Ancient Egypt. So that's more or less the public output of the TLA, edited by our colleague Anke Blöbaum. And if you click on show metadata, you get a lot of metadata. I guess it's all metadata, also all publications and editions known for this text. And of course, to honor our guest today, I've been choosing something from Turin, an oracular amuletic decree that is housed in the Museo Egizio in Turin. And those are very interesting texts because they contain prognostics, what is going to happen to a human after he or she is born. So if he's going to be liked by people, or to protect this person from slander, from the evil eye, from any evil misdoings and demons in his or her life. What else is new at the TLA? Our colleague Simon Schweitzer has been adding a couple of tools at his GitHub account. There's, for instance, also the front end of the new TLA. There is analysis tools for morphosyntactic analysis of the sentences. And he also has the corpus of texts and the dictionary behind this put into his GitHub account, and also published this on the platform Zenodo. Switching to this as well, Zenodo is also a nice way of publishing things open access. It's a great repository, but it's for all kinds of sciences and humanities. And there you can download the complete dictionary, which is behind the TLA. And he used this as a basis for something very handy. Going back to the presentation, you see the QR code on the top right slide here. This is a QR code leading you to an Android app. And then you can have the whole TLA, the whole lexicon of Egyptian words in hieroglyphic, demotic, and so on your phone. So this is for now available for Android, but hopefully for those of you having Apple products, something else might follow soon. So a lot to check out in TLA, and hopefully we'll see the new interface also online soon. Last but not least, I'm going to mention to you a new project in field of Egyptian lexicography called Machine Readable Texts for Egyptologists that has been presented recently in another lecture series, the Digital Classicist Seminar in London, which has been hosted by our colleague Gabi. And check out the YouTube link to know more about this project. Heidi Jauhiainen from Helsinki just started this year with it, so there's not much to see yet on the project database, but she is going to prepare text in order to make them machine readable. And the text means the hieroglyphic versions of the text, because this is still a desideratum in our field, or not really desideratum, let's say work in progress, because the way to it is clear. It just has to be implemented to have the hieroglyphs also available in Unicode. People involved in this are meeting now monthly. Those are the TLA people. Those are the people from the project Ramses, from Microsoft, from the Unicode Consortium, or Jan-Mark Nederhoff, our colleague, who has also been featured here a couple of times. And so there is an ongoing development. And the next step of that would be, after the hieroglyphs are more or less finished in Unicode display, then demotic and hieratic have to be tackled. One final word about digital editions. It's starting also in Egyptology to have editions of texts made available in the internet, and that the knowledge can be added bit by bit as soon as corrections come up. So something that's quite well known to those of you working in ancient Greek texts and papyrology especially, or with ancient Latin. Egyptology, this is just starting, or we did also something with the digital Rosetta Stone project. Today, I'd like to refer to you to David Klotz's volume of Esna II, of the Temple of Esna in Upper Egypt. Very interesting temple, basically from the late Ptolemaic and early Roman period, famous for its astrological, astronomical texts. And David added here a couple of texts which he been dubbed Esna II. There's also Esna I, apparently. He's all describing this in his introduction, and there are, for instance, different elements of the temple wall that you can browse through, where he has transliteration, translation in English, and commentary on this, and people can always send him updates or scholarly discussion. So, coming back, that's what I wanted to tell you about the news from the last year in the philological part of Egyptology, and now we're all looking forward to Susanne's lecture on the Turin Papyrus online platform. The floor is yours.
Okay, Franziska, thank you very much. Okay, so Susanne, you can start, and I will share. Okay, your screen. Here it is.
Okay. So first of all, thank you very much for the invitation to present tonight in this ambiente, the Turin Papyrus online platform. So let's see the sharing. I hope you can see the screen, the presentation now completely.
Yes, it works.
So sorry. Well, actually, as also was already said by the session introduction on the website, I was thinking to have to present first, before I present the actual Turin Papyrus online platform, shortly what is the content of our papyrus collection here in the Museo Egizio and the Egyptian Museum. Normally, I will use the Italian term, since it's like a brand. So we do not translate Museo Egizio. We use the Italian term in general as a brand. So it is indeed that the Papyrus collection, which is part of the Egyptian collection here, is among the bigger collections from the Old Kingdom to the Byzantine period, actually. So it's just an overview. What we have is more or less, we have all kind of genre of text. We have funerary text, we have religious text, ritual text, magical text, administrative, documentary texts, narratives, literary text. So actually everything which can be found in writing, we conserve some of those texts. What kind of language or script we have? We have the Egyptian language. You will see there's actually a differentiation between Egyptian, the language, and the script, because famous, of course, are the hieroglyphs. But hieroglyphs is not a language. So hieroglyphic texts are written in hieroglyphs. The language as it is something which we would call in general as Egyptian. And there are various stadiums of Egyptian, like Old Egyptian or Middle Egyptian, Late Egyptian, or what also Franziska was presenting, more like a traditional Egyptian was used in a later period. Then we have Demotic. Demotic is actually a script and a language used since the late period until the Roman period, which arrives from the Egyptian language. Then we have text in Greek, since so in this case we are a little bit in the classics, since Egypt at a certain period, especially in the Greco-Roman period, the language and script used was Demotic and mainly Greek. And then we also go a little bit beyond let's say the ancient Egypt. We have actually a huge collection, or rather big collection of Coptic manuscripts, and we have some Arabic manuscripts, which make part of our collection due to findings during excavations in the beginning of the 20th century. So as I said in the beginning, that we have manuscripts dating from the Old Kingdom, so about 2500 BC, until the Byzantine period. So the latest manuscripts we have can be dated to the 10th century after. And the core of our collection, Papyrus Collection, comes from the collection of Bernardino Trovetti. Bernardino Trovetti was a consul in Egypt, the French consul in Egypt, actually under Napoleon, who during his time in Egypt was buying thousands of objects, among them, of course, papyri. And this collection, or one of his collections, was bought by the Savoia, which was the let's say part of the royal family here in Italy, in Turin, and was given let's say was donated more or less to the state, or more or less, and this was the core for our collection. And the second part of our papyrus collection comes from the 20th century excavations, so in the beginning of the 20th century, mainly by Ernesto Schiaparelli and Giulio Farina in Egypt. And as you see on the left side on the map, the places highlighted in red, not all of them, I mean, all of them are the places where the excavations took place in the past, in the beginning of the 20th century. And we have papyri from some of those places, but mainly, and this was highlighted there with an arrow, from the area of modern Luxor, of Thebes, and they are from the village of Del Medina, but I will talk about this later on. What I would like to do is to give very short overview about, let's say, the highlights. I say highlights because actually when you search online, and not just on our Papyrus Collection website, when you search online for the Turin papyri, you find several Wikipedia entries. And one of the first entry you probably might find is the Wikipedia entry about the Turin papyrus. There is an entry about the Turin papyrus, which is a little bit confusing because we have more than just one papyrus in our collection. But one of this Turin papyrus is the so-called Turin King List, or Royal Canon. What you see here is a very rather fragmentary manuscript, which has text on the recto and verso, on both sides. Famous is actually the back side of this fragmentary manuscript because it conserves a list or several lists of kings, probably dating to the time of Ramses II, so the copies dating to the time of Ramses II. But the kings listed there are kings from the Old Kingdom, also actually a little bit before, so the so-called mythological kings, until kings to the second intermediate period, and which is a document rather important for the chronology of ancient Egypt, and for the and also for the understanding of the sequence of pharaohs, etc. So this is one of the, let's say, more or less famous papyri. A second one you might find on Wikipedia is the so-called Turin gold mine papyrus, or mine map. There are several names about this. The name is based, as you can see, because on the front side, on the recto of the papyrus, there is a drawing of a map, and this is the map of the so-called Wadi Hammamat. The Wadi Hammamat was a wadi near the east side, so on the east side of Egypt, near the Red Sea. And this is where the Egyptians were getting their stones So this is what you actually see here is you see two kind of mountains. The orange reddish mountains are the mountains where they got gold, which is also written in the, you cannot see the details, but there's hieratic script written on it. So it says this is the mountains where they broke the gold, and the brownish greenish mountains is where they get a stone which is called the Bachelon Stone, which is something like Greywakke. So it's a rather famous grayish stone, and this was actually, and this is written in the text, used for the statues, but also partly of the temple of, for example, the Pharaoh Ramses II. Very interesting is that actually the backside of the manuscript, and this is what you see in the second picture below, was used several times. So the front side has this very nicely drawn map of the Wadi Hammamat. On the backside, you find several texts, more than 10 different kind of texts, starting from right to left. You have, for example, you have a letter, you have administrative and documentary texts. Later on, you find also religious compositions. Then you find a hymn to gods, and later on you find another administrative text, and in the end, this is the very fragmentary part, you find several drawing exercises, and so which was actually done rather often, especially from papyri coming. This is papyrus comes from the Medina, and the papyri from the New Kingdom were rather often used several times. So it was, especially the empty backside was reused several times. But I will come back to this later on, because this is an interesting feature, important also for our documentation. Another papyrus, well known because it gives an interesting insight in tomb constructions. This is the so-called tomb plan of Ramses IV, of the tomb of Ramses IV. So what we have here on papyrus on the front side is actually, it's a sketch of the actual tomb of Pharaoh Ramses IV in the Valley of the Kings. And what you see here on the right side is it's a plan taken from the Valley of the Queens project online, and you can actually see, it did not highlight this, that the right section, this is where you find the coffin chamber, is actually a more or less accurate drawing of the final structure of the tomb. And also here in this case, the back side has several texts written on them. Another document which comes from the Medina, from the New Kingdom, is the so-called Turin strike papyrus. Strike papyrus because what you have here written on back side, on front side. So it's completely written on back and front side, a fragmentary manuscript. And it is concerns, as the name says, it's a strike which took place in under the time of Ramses III, which was because the workmen in Del Medina, probably because I mentioned already several times the name Del Medina. I will mention this later on. Del Medina is actually a modern name of a small village which was on the west side of Thebes, so modern Luxor. It was located within the necropolis on the western side. And Del Medina was actually the village where the workmen who built the royal tombs in the Valley of the Kings and Valley of the Queens during the so-called New Kingdom lived with their families. So it was actually a village. And this village is still rather well preserved. Later on, I will show you an image. And in this village, or coming from this village, not directly found in the village, but coming from this village, are preserved thousands of manuscripts, and this is actually the core of our Papyrus collection here in Turin, as I will mention later on. And so since the village of Del Medina was the village of the workmen went striked at a certain point, or not several times during the New Kingdom, because the supplies were missing. So they were complaining that there was not enough food. So the supplies of food, but of course also supplies of working tools were missing. This means they couldn't either they could eat, and they hadn't tools to work in the tombs. And this is what the strike papyrus is telling us about the process, and why they were complaining or striking, and what kind of ways they went in order to get the supplies they deserve. Another papyrus, which is rather famous but is also interesting, is the so-called harem conspiracy papyrus or Utica Papyrus. This is actually also one of the papyrus which is called the Turin Papyrus. It is a very nicely preserved papyrus, because also nicely preserved because the materiality is very interesting. But this is a documentary papyrus, because in a very nicely written hieratic hand preserved is a text which concerns the I actually forgot the English term, which was the attack of Pharaoh Ramses III by one of his wives, because it was about the discussion whose son, so the son of which wife would become the next pharaoh. And one of Ramses III's wives were planning an I forgot the English term. Were planning to kill Ramses III, and this is actually a list of the men and women involved in this operation, and what kind of punishment they had to expect later on, because in the end Ramses III was not murdered by his wife, because the attack did not went well for the wife. Another manuscript which is gained a lot of public attention is the so-called Satyric Erotic Papyrus. So it's a nickname. So it's really the so-called based on the depictions. So the papyrus is also rather fragmentary manuscript, and which concerns a satirical part, so which is the upper picture, where you can see animals and the behavior of human behavior, partly dressed, musicians who were playing instruments, and you cannot see this in the detail now, but all the papyri I present here are online accessible in high resolution images. So this is where you have the link on the upper right side. So you see the animals in behavior of humans making music, but also in small war scenes, fighting scenes, etc. And on the left side, so which is the lower the image on the lower part, you see men and women in intercourse. So in sexual intercourse, with it's very prominent. So this is why it is called also sometimes something like a pornographic papyrus, which is a absolutely modern interpretation. So because what exactly the meaning of this manuscript is, there is a huge discussion in Egyptology and in general in the research a scientific field. But let's say some say it's a didactic manuscript, so it could be understood as a didactic manuscript. Others try to interpret this as also in terms under gender discussions, that women actually have a higher position during this time. And then there's another discussion about this. It's really purely to be seen as a document for entertainment and for the joy, for example, on the royal court. So I will leave it open like this. So, but this is really the so-called Satyric Erotic Papyrus is one of the more well-known manuscripts. But again, it's erotic, not a pornographic manuscript. Besides the papyri from Del Medina, so the papyri I mentioned before, written in the so-called hieratic script, which is a cursive form of the hieroglyphic script, we have here in Turin a rather bigger collection of so-called funerary papyri, and among this is the so-called text composition, which is called Book of the Dead. So it's a modern composition or modern title used by the German scholar Richard Lepsius, which was given by him to a composition, a rather long composition of funerary spells, which are for the protection and for the guidance of the deceased in the afterlife. And the base actually of this study of the Book of the Dead study, which is still ongoing, and this was, for example, presented by Rita Lucarelli, it was actually based on the papyrus of Iof Ankh in the Museo Egizio. So Richard Lepsius came here to Turin in the 1830s and 40s to study this papyrus, which is a 90-meter long papyrus written in the cursive hieroglyphic script, but dating to the Ptolemaic period. And so this manuscript was the base for a field which is in Egyptology still ongoing of the Book of the Dead study. Another Book of the Dead manuscript is the Book of the Dead of the architect Ka. This is the Papyrus of Erotic was actually bought by Bernardino Trovetti, so which is, we do not have the context. This is different for the Book of the Dead of Ka, because Ka, the tomb of Ka, was found and opened by Schiaparelli in the beginning of the 20th century in 1906, and the papyrus was found completely well preserved, as you can see, on the second coffin of Ka in his tomb. And this is one of the best preserved New Kingdom papyri, which is now still tested from this period, very well preserved in a cursive hieroglyphic script with beautiful drawn color vignettes. So the papyri, what we mainly have, we have papyri from the, let's say, what you would call the classic pharaonic period. And we go a little bit in the direction of, let's say, classic studies. We have here in the museum also several manuscripts written in Demotic, in the Demotic script, and so the label is not correct. It should be Demotic papyri, not papyrus. What we have here, for example, we have two private archives, rather well known, and the private archive of Senhor, so the papyrus on the right corner, is one example, and we have the private family archive of the priest Töpfer, and the two manuscripts above are them. The Töpfer's archive was actually found by Schiaparelli during excavations in the Medina, and the picture you see on the left side, it's an archive picture which is showing the original situation of papyri. And the archive of Senhor was bought by Trovetti, so it's part of the Trovetti collection, but also might come from this area, theme area. All of the manuscripts are also online. And as I mentioned a bit before, that we have in the museum a collection of about more or less 19 papyrus codices, which are coming from Tis. Tis was coming from a monastery located in Tis, which is a little bit northern of Abydos, dating to the 7th or 8th century after. Coptic, who are not really familiar with this, Coptic is the language and script used by let's say, the Christians. So it's still Coptic, it's still spoken language. The Coptic language, the ancient Coptic language, however, is based on the Egyptian language. So although the script, as you can see, it's a Greek script, the language as it is follows more Egyptian rules. What they did is that they took the Greek script and they inserted, in addition to this, several demotic letters, which was used, which was important for the pronunciation, but also for the language. So here we have about 19 codices, which are unfortunately, which were separated. The sheets were separated in the 19th century. So this is why you see on the left side, each page, which on both sides is preserved in a separate frame, although originally it was actually a book. So it was a codex. And this is one of the latest papyrus codex preserved, since you might be aware that, especially after the 3rd and 4th century, they swapped from papyrus to pergamena to parchment, codices. Coming back to the Medina, this is why it's also highlighting, or it's important for the Turin Papyrus platform, is the core of our papyrus collection is actually the hieratic papyri coming from the Medina. As I mentioned before, the Medina, and now you see a little bit where it is located, is the village for the workmen in the western side of Thebes. This is where it's also directly located in the necropolis. On the left side, you see the village as it is preserved today, which is part of the French excavations there. So mainly all the papyri presented before coming from this collection, but besides those papyri, we have more than about 250 well-preserved manuscripts. And when I say well-preserved manuscripts, I talk about manuscripts as you will see, as you can see them on the right side. Some of them are fragmentary, but this is what we call a manuscript, more or less completely preserved papyrus documents. However, what we also have is, besides the about 250 well-preserved documents which already have inventory numbers, we have a collection of about 9,000 or 10,000 fragments, papyrus fragments, which are in a condition as you can see it here. And those fragments are so far were not documented in our papyrus collection, and were not well known to scholars. In general, were not well known because they were not documented. And actually, this situation to have manuscripts well preserved here, although well preserved, you can see already that not all of them are completely preserved. So the manuscript you see on the right side is still a lot of fragments missing. And this is actually what we found out just already in the past, is among the not yet or undocumented material, which is stored in boxes and folders, are fragments which can be joined, attached to the already documented, already inventoried manuscripts. So because of this situation, to have manuscripts well preserved, rather well preserved, with inventory numbers, and hundreds or thousands of not documented projects, papyrus fragments, this was actually the birth of an idea to create somehow a tool in order to find find the right manuscript for the right fragments. So this is what I called here digital papyrus puzzle. So what you have to imagine that we already have, let's say, 250 more or less complete puzzles, but we have about 9,000 pieces of puzzles, and we do not really know how we should handle the situation of understanding which piece of puzzle belongs to which manuscript document. And because, as you can imagine, it's not as easy as you would do at home to put a puzzle on the table, the piece of a puzzle, and then start puzzling. This is what you could do with one document, with one papyrus, but you cannot do this with 250 manuscripts and 9,000 pieces. So what we did is, based on the experiences, of course, from other fields, is we are thinking about a platform in general, a digital tool, in which we could insert all kind of information on the text and the material in order to find at least virtually the joining objects with the joining documents. So what you see here is the core of the Turin Papyrus online platform, as it was developed in 2017 and went online in 2019. And this is an ongoing project. So what we did is we went online 2019 with a documentation of all the 250 the Medina papyri with inventory numbers. And this is based on the tool, as you can see. The database is structured, and I will show you this now, on 3 levels. We talk about objects, document, and text witnesses. An object is actually the fragment. So all the thousands of fragments in the cardboards, in the boxes, this is what we consider as an object. All the fragments together, if they are joining, this is what the creation of a document. So they're actually papyrus roll. And this is what I will explain to you also later on, is that on a document, so on a papyrus roll, there can be written several texts, not actually just one text. There can be written down several texts, and this is what we consider as text witness or text witnesses. And as also, I mean, because this topic or argument of your sessions and digital humanities in general, it's about open data. So this is just a structure which I will explain based on the database later on. The general idea also of the Musée Egyptien Turin, and we're starting this with the Papyrus online platform, but this is something we go in general in this direction, is to collaborate, and so it's about collaboration, it's about open data. I think especially people working with papyri and papyrology, classics, it doesn't matter if you work with classical text or with the Egyptian text, Erotic text, is that normally in museum collections, the permission to study objects, might be a papyrus, might be a stele, is given to one single scholar. This is the problem, that this rather leads to publications in the long term, because I mean, scholars have a lot of rights for publishing, but not the time. The approach for the museum is different. This means we do not give single permissions to single scholars. We try to collaborate internationally, nationally and internationally, in order to have a high output of research, and in order really to connect different kind of expertises and of knowledge on material and especially text. So this is why the Turin Papyrus online platform is a collaborative platform. And this is what you can see also online on the website. It's written down in the article. This is just one part of the international communities of scholars working with us on our Turin papyri, and actually those colleagues, or mainly those colleagues, were the base why we started this project 4 years ago, the international project. And I mentioned this briefly because this is what the fragments is about. Actually, is born out of the Turin Papyrus online project, and the base, and this, I mean, we give the base for this project is the so-called Crossing Binaries project. It's a project which is it's a lead agency or European project financed by the Swiss National Science Foundation and by the FNF. So it's Belgium, Swiss, and Italian project. And this is focusing especially on the Medina papyri, and especially on the Medina papyri, which have several texts written on the recto and verso. And this is what is called heterogeneous papyri from the Medina. So heterogeneous, as I mentioned, this is the Goldman papyrus, is a fantastic example, because you find on the front side the map with one text, on the back side the verso. You have several texts written by several authors, scribes, so the different divide between scribe and author, and also written about over a certain period of time. So we have text written under the reign of Ramses IV to text written under the reign of Ramses VI. So the Crossing Binaries project is actually about the documentation and the study and the joining of fragments of those kind of papyri. And with this, I would now switch to the database. If there are not other questions or comments.
I don't see questions in the chat. I don't know if there are questions in our panel, but I think I shared the link to the Crossing Boundaries website, because this is very interesting, so also for our audience. But I think you can go on, Susanne. So now we can see. Yes, we can share your screen. Mm-hmm. So okay.
Now you see the browser. Yeah. Okay.
Yes, we can see the homepage of it. Yeah.
Exactly. So this is the homepage, and again, so you have to stop, because I'm talking rather fast. But please stop me if I'm too fast or too slow, because it's getting late otherwise. So this is the website. Where over this website, which is in English and Italian, you have access directly to the Papyrus platform. The database actually is accessible in 2 ways. More or less, actually 3 ways. There is the database, so it's a general website where you find also information about the project. Then there is a front end, or this is a front end of the database, which is accessible without any kind of login. So it's an easy, because since we are a museum, we are a public estate collection. This means we have to give access to our objects to the wider public. So this is why we agreed on presenting some of our papyri, not all of them, so the more interest or famous papyri to the general public, and providing basic information on the text, like having a general description, giving general information, have all the images are available without login online, and presenting the main text in an English and Italian translation from the website, and also given the hieroglyphic script. So this is the database front end for the let's say for the user without any kind of a public user when any kind of login. However, the user can ask for registration, which is for free, and there's no limitation who can have access to the database. So the database is mainly, as you will see, it is set up for scholars. So it's a research database which was done by researchers for researchers. However, the database can be used by teachers, for example, for the academic purposes, but can be also used for the interested laymen. So the registration or the acceptance of registration is not provided only to scholars. However, if you ask for the registration, you will have an access which looks more or less like this. So this is how the database right now looks like. And as you can see, it's a functional database or platform which, as I said before, it was done by researchers for researchers. The idea is to have an easy data entry, and although it looks in the beginning rather complex, to really retrieve information, all kind of information. As I mentioned in the PowerPoint presentation, the database is separated into 3 levels. What you see here is actually 2 levels. You see the document level and the so-called object level. So the document, as I mentioned before, is the manuscript, the complete manuscript papyrus roll, which is mainly, not always, compiled of several objects. This is the inventory numbers you see here, is the so-called objects. And I will just enter in one of the documents, which has, for example, a label. This is what you saw already online, which is the so-called 7 royal hymns. So here, actually, you see the 3-level structure. So we have information about the document. The information about the document are purely information about the physical object, which is, as you can see, a document ID, which is given automatically by the database, because here the inventory number is not of importance right now. You find here a general description. I should mention, as you will see, although the website is in English and Italian, the database itself is just in English. So we have, I will show you later on, the translation of text are given in 4 languages. But the database as it is given only in English due to the easier handling of the data, also data entry. So on the document level, you have general information, general description. You have, for example, information about which project the database is attached to. For the IT or computer scientists or students among of you, it's interesting that now you see a database as it is visible to me as an administrator. What I can do to this kind of separation, I can give each user, so there are different kinds of users. There can be a web user. For example, if interested layman, or for example, Franziska Naether. Franziska Naether is a colleague. She could ask the access to this database. I would grant her, of course, the access, and she would have access to all papyri which are visible to the public and to the so-called web user. However, there are, for example, manuscripts which are visible only to a certain group, like me, for example, but also to a group which is called users. Users are actually the colleagues collaborating actively with us who can enter data in the database. But even this level of users, I can separate. I can also assign this kind of user. I can say that, for example, this is one of our Turin PhD students who is a user, but he might be user just to a certain group of papyri. So by adding this kind of projects, I can also underdivide the user rights which colleagues have. So I can assign certain groups, working groups, for example, a group of papyri documents to projects. And for example, the Crossing Boundaries project is assigned to all the Medina manuscript, but not, for example, to the Coptic manuscripts, because the Coptic manuscripts are part of another project. So this means each user can also have different kind of reader and editor rights. In my case, as an administrator, I can edit all fields. For example, the Crossing Binaries members have access only to their Medina papyri, and they can edit only the fields I assign to them. So which might be of interest for the back office of the database. Otherwise, we have very general information about the measurements, as you would need the provenance and the date of the document. The date, and this is what was mentioned by Franziska in the beginning introduction, is we also collaborate actively and passively, actually, with other online projects. So what we implemented in our database the TOT list, so which was presented by Franziska. So the TOT is the Liège project, where we which is directly implemented with the API in the database for the dates, for the date of the pharaohs, etc. So here if TOT is changing something, it will be changed directly in our database, as it is here. What we also did, this is not yet visible for you, but we work with drop-down lists. So we have several empty fields free fields where you can fill in the text, but mainly if possible, we work with drop-down lists. And we also copied or implemented the drop-down, so the informations, for example, like something like material, the names for material, museum, technique of text content, language. So all the names here are taken from TOT in order to have the same terminology, which is of importance. So those lists from TOT are implemented in the database. Here, however, it's a directly API implementation, what we did. On the object level, you have the overview of all the joining fragments, which really are compiling in the end this kind of document. You have different ways of seeing the information on the objects. You can open actually an object by clicking on for example, by clicking on the link. But you can also, if you would like to stay in the field, you click on the eye, and if the browser is not slow as mine is right now, you see below the general information on the object. The object is giving more information on the actually material features of the papyrus, which we do not insert in the document. So the document has information, really mainly information on the text. Here, the object, however, is giving the information, very important information about the inventory numbers, etc., which is more important for the museum, because the database, actually Papyrus database, is not just for scholar research and for the communication between scholars, it is also for our internally documentation. So this is, for example, some fields are not visible for the general user. So here we have very detailed information, which is important for the joining of objects, because all fields you see here are searchable in the database. So you have here the search function, which is very detailed. And here we we enter very detailed information on all kind of features which might be of importance for searching later belonging fragments. What we also have the possibility is the upload of additional material, which is always under the copyright laws. What we have here, we have the upload of PDFs of old Turin catalogs, which give information on the object. And we also have the possibility, due to the collaboration, for example, we work also together with the Berlin-Brandenburgische Akademie, so with the TLA, and with Oxford, where we have, and not in this example, where we have also the upload possibility of notebooks, which are housed, for example, at Berlin in the Akademie der Wissenschaften, or Oxford, the Griffith Institute. So all those fields which are concerned directly to the object are uploaded in as free PDFs in the database. And let's just present, because the time is running, just the more important, I don't want to say more important, but the interesting aspect is the writing section. So the writing is, as you can see here, and it's a bit slow because the browser, it takes some time, because the database is uploading all the drop-down lists in the back office. Here you have the several texts. So in this example, we have just one text. There's a hymn on the back side and front side. And the text are encoded. And as you can see, since it's an online database, it can be encoded from every place where you're sitting. So in this case, it was encoded here in Turin by Andrea Fanciulli. And we have this general information here. What we also have here, to come back to the introduction by Franziska, is we not implemented, but we hyperlinked the translation of given already in the Thesaurus. So here you already find, if there is already an existing translation, we have the same here for other databases, so which are hyperlinked. So it's Ramses Online. We collaborate with Ramses Online. Some of the Ramses Online papyri are directly encoded in our database. We already have the link to SIA, so there is actively a collaboration between Leipzig, the Akademie der Wissenschaften in Leipzig, and Turin. The same that we have the hyperlink to the Book of the Dead project in Bonn, and as mentioned also by Franziska, is Trismegistus. So we also use the Trismegistus numbers, and if there is a link to Trismegistus, it is added here. Just to present here, I mean, there's more kind of writings. The text content is that we add very general information about what kind of text type. All of these are drop-down lists. We have the possibility, if in this case there are no names, to include to add the names which we use in this kind of format, so which is like the Egyptian format. So we do not use the English or German transliteration. We use the Egyptian terminology in order to make it more uniform for the users to use. And this is important, we encode the text in the transliteration, which is done in this case by we use Unicode in this way, and the translation is done can be done in 4 languages, which would be English, German, French, and Italian. So the 4 Egyptological languages. The encoding is done mainly in the language of the author. In this case, Andrea Fanciulli is doing his PhD in English, because it's an international European PhD. This is why he was encoding his text in English, but also in Italian, since he's a native speaker. So we do not translate languages or text in other languages if not done by us. So we do not use translation. We encode in the language of the author, or the language the author is most familiar with. And in this case, the Thesaurus is already providing a German translation this way, while we put again the hyperlink here. And this was already mentioned, was JSesh. So JSesh is the open source hieroglyphic editor by Serge Smodou, and with him we collaborated and we implemented directly in TPOP the JSesh program. So instead of opening JSesh externally, you could, it's implemented in the database, so we can type in the modus of the JSesh directly in the database, and we can render the hieroglyphic text, which is of importance for this philological study of hieratic scripts. And this is also visible for all kinds of users. And then there are general fields like comments, remark fields, and again, text and bibliography references. Here in the bibliography references, what we also were doing is we are we're using hyperlinks to the OEB, which is the online Egyptological bibliography, in order to make it easier for the international scholarship to find the books, because it's more, we use more the short citations of the texts here. So this is something we do on all kind of texts, and just briefly, just to to mention this before. So for example, here the fragments you see here, those are the fragments by the Crossing Boundaries project. So the Crossing Boundaries project is working with the small fragments here. So normally the fragments, as you saw in the introduction, were stored in cardboard, so without inventory number. What we are doing is in the database, each fragment receives an inventory number. So this is for the internal documentation. We use a system which is important for us. It's inserted and encoded in the database with all this kind of material features, measurements, etc. And later on, and this was already done by one of the Crossing Boundaries colleagues, is because of the database, we are able to virtually at least to assign the fragment to an already documented document, to a document already with an inventory number. So what you see here is, for example, you see, which is also on display, a manuscript which contains on the front side famous love songs. So it's a well-known document. Because of the database, because of the collaboration with colleagues, so far, until 2 years ago, only this number was known, so which was a huge manuscript. But because of the Crossing Boundaries project, there are additional fragments now which can be assigned to this document. So actually, we can start filling some of the gaps here because of the project and the database. Right now, we're doing this only virtually because the physical restoration or attachment of the fragments, this is something we will do later in the second step when we are sure that all existing fragments are known and scanned, because otherwise we would need to open and close frames several times because we never know if there might be another fragment still coming up. So this project with the documentation of the fragments is a project which started in 2019, and it's a 4-year project. So 2023, we will hopefully finish the documentation and also encoding of all the Dambidine fragments. And then, of course, the work of joining the fragments will not be done. But I think based on the work of the colleagues, for example, for this document here, a huge part of the collection will already have received some more context of the fragments. And this, for example, is a very nice example for one of the heterogeneous papyri. And what the database is actually providing is, you see here that this rather small manuscript document, papyrus roll, contains on the recto side, on the front side, 3 different kind of text types, and on the verso side, the back side, actually 9 different texts, something like an account, a deposition, and then there is another account. Then we have a dispute, and we have an oath, and then the list, for example, the list of thieves, which is rather interesting because they choose papyrus with the love songs to write a list of thieves at on the back side. And what you hear, example, this is, and I will finish with this. This is an example because the love song papyrus was already encoded by the Ramses Online project. So here you find, for example, the link, although you will find the link, but the papyrus is not visible in Ramses Online yet. However, the colleagues and with who we collaborate, they already included their research, their data in our database. This is why we have the French translation in Ramses in TPOP here, and it was encoded also by the colleagues. And I think due to the time, I would stop here. But again, since it's a database is online, the all informations are accessible online. But should there now be questions or comments, you're very welcome to shoot.
Okay, so Susanne, thank you very much for this really rich presentation, and we already have questions in the chat. Okay, so I think okay, okay, we can start. We have our colleague Somi Yagawa from Kyoto in Japan. So the first okay, question about the database. Okay, if you have an API for the data in your database, because I see that you can get data from the database through their API. So the question is if you have an API.
It is a good question. So far as I understand, so I'm the philologist, so I'm the Egyptologist. So far as I understand, actually we have this, because I did not mention this because this goes into the details, but the Crossing Boundaries project has another sub-project, which is about it's another detailed project about the construction of the so-called virtual light table. So this is done from the Basel colleagues, and the idea is something like Photoshop online. So in order that, and because of the implementation, so this virtual light table is actually using our API in order to get the pictures and the informations in their virtual light table. So far, in theory, as far as I know, we have this, but this is exactly what we are working on right now. The basic colleagues working on the construction of the virtual light table, and so I have here in Turin an IT team, and I think what they have to provide the data via an API, as far as I understood. So, and for really more information about this, I actually would need to have an email and to ask my colleagues. Yeah.
Yes, of course, but this is important, and I'm sure that you are working on it. And
yeah.
And this is for our pictures. They are fundamental, because the first important thing about your project is to provide the scholars, users with pictures, which are
actually, because I was also actually not zooming in the pictures, but I don't know if the PowerPoint is still visible. The browser.
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
Yes,
what you see actually here is that I did not mention this. So the manuscripts, all manuscripts are scanned actually. Some of them we work with photos for the bigger manuscripts, but the fragments and the Medina manuscripts are all scanned 1-to-1 in the same scale, in order to have the same scale later on. And they are scanned with 1200 dpi, uploaded in a smaller version in order not to crash down the database. So for example, the user can already zoom in a little bit like in the Google mode, zoom in. Here, users can download the images, web users can download images in a small JPEG version, but they can always request the high resolution TIFF images. So we use TIFF images. And actually, also what you can do is here, it's a little bit in the, it's a C, C driver, C line. It's a tool where you can, what you can see here is we can implement comments on certain aspects. This is why it's a collaborative platform. So we can hear C-Dragon, actually, this is named C-Dragon. It's implemented in order that we can communicate directly on the texts.
This is very interesting, because one note is about the papyri is that we can scan them. They are not inscriptions, so there is so they are very fragile, but there is this thing that, and in the community, so we have to mention the fact that papyrologists have been working a lot since many years in the field of digital humanities, and one aspect is this, the possibility really to use a scanner for taking these images. And thank you for mentioning this part about comments. There is also a lot of work in the big community of digital humanities and digital classics, for example, for isolating, for citing regions of interest in these images, and then commenting, providing transcriptions, translations, etc. So these pictures are really fundamental. And I see that there is also a related question in the chat by about the Triple Aix Standard. I don't know if you plan to use it. So this is a standard for providing basically images on the web, and is used a lot by museums and other collections. Probably in the future, you will also use this standard.
I mean, it's really, as you said, it's planning. So right now, I mean, we are doing already a lot. I mean, I think it's an ongoing project. So we actually have the same. Actually, goes with the API question. Is right now the database is constructed for our internal use, so for our documentation, and this case for the collaboration. But of course, the general idea is to give really long-term, and this is, I think we all have to think about really long-term preservation, long-term possibility to provide access to the images and to the data, which are two things actually. And this is really something we constantly need to think about this and to establish a better program. So in this case, also for the images, we need to find a better tool to provide images of the image, because right now it's really scanned and provided via the database with a download button. But because it's set in our repository, but this is also not. This has to be changed in the long term, also because of the bigger data we have with this problem. And also, just to come back to the image, the scanning process is actually scanning of papyrus. It's like you can use the book scanners, what you do with ancient manuscripts. So this is why, I mean, you can actually use a normal scanner, which is the same because the light influence on the papyrus is very short. So actually, a flashlight has more impact on a papyrus as it has a normal scanner. But what, for example, bigger collections like Berlin, they're using a book scanner, which is even more easier in order to scan the manuscripts.
Yes. Yes, exactly. So this is one of the thing about papyrus, and this is important because definitely many fragments are scattered in the many different collections. So getting these images is fundamental. And I think that another fundamental thing that you mentioned was this distinction between documents, objects, and then maybe we can also add text, which is a thing that we have been discussing a lot also for digital philology. But Gabby, probably you have a question, a note? Yeah.
Just a very brief point. As far as I can see, OpenSeaDragon plays very nicely with Triple Aix, so actually implementing that should be very easy.
So I did not. So what about the Seadragon?
It works. It plays very nicely with Triple Aix.
Yeah.
So you should be able to get that working, but looks like that works out of the box. So.
Yeah, so this was actually also a consideration, not by me, because it was, I mean, as you normally, you as a philologist, you have an idea. So it was actually done by the IT company, providing tools which actually we can really develop later on and implement it in other kind of projects. So this is exactly why they suggested Seadragon, and before this we had a kind of a Google software, which was more complicated. Yeah.
Okay, excellent, thank you. And yes, of course, this is another interesting part of the project. We need different expertise. Of course, Susanne is the Egyptologist, the philologist, but definitely there is also an IT group. Also because this project is huge, there are so many things to do. The collection is super rich, considering also the importance of the Museo Egizio in Turin, we can say that. And so there are really many things. But the first thing to provide data and images. Then we also have others. So going on with so it's asking also about Arabic translations of the text.
Let's say this would go along with the line of the Museo Egizio. So actually we, as you saw with the Revista, which was presented by Franziska, so and our abstracts are presented in Arabic, since we also have collaboration with the Egyptian colleagues. And so in this case, let's say in the long term, absolutely. But I mean, right now is what you can actually see that there are 4 fields right now. So again, French, English, German, and Italian. You will not find right now one entry where you find all 4 languages, because this is also a very how do you say, ambitious project in order to have all 4 languages for all of them. So this will take time, but the same for the Arabic translations. I think what actually we consider to have at least in the shorter time is at least to have the general description, which you can see on the website, also in Arabic. So because in the database, I mean, right now in the database, we have more than 5,000 entries. So this is rather a lot. On the website, so what I sent on the general collection, Papyrus Collection website, you find about 82 manuscripts right now. So for those, for example, 82, it will be more, you find English and Italian journal descriptions, but we would like to have at least those journal descriptions also in Arabic. So to go back to So's question is translations, absolutely in the long term. I mean, later on, absolutely. What we really would like to start shorter is at least to have Arabic general transcriptions. and especially really for the Egyptian colleagues working with our texts. Yeah.
Yes, thank you. Yes, and I think this is interesting. So you mentioned these languages. Okay, the language used in the scholarly community, but also the language of the editor in the end, if I understood, as you mentioned, your PhD colleague. So of course he's providing an English monograph, but also an Italian, because he's an Italian native speaker. And then of course we can have, and this is the part, the collaborative part. This is what we need.
Exactly.
in our community. So as soon as you will have more editors in other languages, you will be able, of course, to add more languages, including Arabic. And then yes, a final note about. So yes, he was okay. Yes, thank you. And then also
welcome.
Yes, it's easy to implement in Triple Aix. Okay, so other comments also in the panel. I don't know, Franziska, if you want to add something, or Gabby. In the meantime, I look at the chat.
We can have, in the meantime, a look at the exercise and at the further reading, if you like.
Yes, of course, because in GitHub, in our session outline, we have not only the readings, but also the exercise. I don't know, do I have to share your screen?
Yes, you can share my screen.
Okay, excellent. You are okay, excellent.
Can go back to the presentation. So there's 2 articles available in open access if you want to read a little bit more into the Turin database, and also the Crossing Boundaries project. And of course, there's also a link if you want to try out the database on yourself, maybe getting registered. And as an exercise, Susanne has come up with the following: how many Amduat papyri written in cursive hieroglyphic script can you find in the database? Choose one of them and write down 1 paragraph on what information you find most interesting, and another paragraph what information you are missing. And Susanne, I'm asking you now, do you want to illuminate people what the Amduat is, or do you want to let them find out for themselves?
Well, I mean, I don't know if there's somebody present who already did this, the exercise, or I mean, because actually, the Amduat papyri belong to the group of funerary papyri. So I don't know, Franziska, if you, since we are online, otherwise I can share my screen. Might be easier in order that, for instance,
of course you can.
So now you see the browser, and so what we have a group of 18 Amduat papyri. So what is an Amduat papyrus? We'll open. Let me just see this is a nice example. And Amduat papyrus belongs to the group of funerary papyri. So this is a little bit. I talked about the Book of the Dead papyrus, which is manuscript, which is like a guide through the afterlife for the deceased on this journey in the afterlife. And the Amduat is something similar. It's also something like it's even more a guide through the mountains and the geographical sphere of the underworld, because in the Egyptian belief, the underworld was constructed more or less like our modern present world. So there was something like waters, you have mountains, you have architectural buildings, and etc. The interesting that the Amduat is that because the whole idea of the Egyptian religion was a little bit about the cosmographical circle. So this means there was the 12 hours per day and the 12 hours during the night. And the deceased is actually traveling with the sun. So this means during the day, the deceased is traveling with the sun the 12 hours in the heaven. And during the night, he's traveling with the sun god in his bark, in his ship, through the underworld. And this is actually the topic of the Amduat papyri. So they talk about the 12 hours in the night, in the afterlife, in the underworld, when the deceased is part among the entourage of the sun god and other gods, like of course the famous god Osiris, which is the god of the underworld. Which is really interesting that the Egyptians actually, it's really not a strict separation of the spheres, it's really one cosmos. So the cosmos, it's what you have during lifetime. You take part of the same cosmos in the after death, in the afterlife. And the Amduat papyri describe this, and let's see if my browser is doing this. Describe. So this is a short version. You see here, for example, let's say deities or demons, but demons, as Rita probably was pointing out, demons are not always a negative figures. I mean, demons are also sometimes have very positive aspects. And here in this way, it's really that you have, let's say, divine figures or figures connected to the underworld in this rather strange constellation. And then you have different kind of texts, which are, in this case, it's an offering formula, which is connecting, of course, the journey through the afterlife also with regeneration and regeneration, etc. Because this is actually what it is. Because during the travel in the afterlife, the sun god can regain his power. He can English version, because I think Italian. He can gain new power. He can get some rest during his lifetime, and this is what he needs for the 12 hours in the day. And yeah, here you see different kind of figures. And so this is what, very fast I close this, the Amduat is about. And we have 18 of those papyri online. And this was also encoded by, and actually it was a master thesis done on our papyri. And I think I asked, yeah, if somebody was searching for the papyri, well, what they found out about them.
Thank you very much so far for the exercise. If people have questions, they can reach out to us or send us their results, and especially also if they're missing information. So this would be a great help also for Susanne and her colleagues.
Okay,
Yeah.
excellent. Really, thank you, Franziska and Susanne, for explaining also the exercise. So we still have 5 minutes. Well, I have a big question for the future, of course, because really this project is amazing, and I know that you have a lot of work to do. But users, okay, and this is an interesting thing. You mentioned the different users, okay, scholars working on the project, other scholars contributing to it, like master students, PhD candidates, which is very important. But do you plan to include other users, for example, something like the citizen science project, like the project Ancient Lives in Oxford, where we have people contributing in some way to well, reading, or at least contributing to this database, and maybe also to reading the papyri.
Mm-hmm.
Or do you plan to, yeah. Please.
No, so I mean, right now, exactly. So we started, of course, with the rather concrete defined group of users. So the users, which are the collaborators, as you said, so the external professors, which are really already studying the text. And as you are aware, of course, the encoding of the text requires a certain knowledge. So this means you need to be Egyptologist with a certain knowledge of the text. So the same, for example, the PhD students is one level. The master students, of course, the master students mainly, students, for example, are my master students, are students from my colleagues, etc. So this means, of course, the master, the thesis were supervised by us. So this means, of course, the author is always the student, the scholar. So this means it is their responsibility and also their intellectual property what they put in. On the other side, of course, if this is a work done by a student, master student or PhD student, of course it is supervised by, let's say, by a doctorate or a professor with some more experience. However, what you mentioned is actually, it's not yet pointed out on the website, but we are, first of all, I'm very, very, very eager to receive comments, and also actually maybe also some kind of offers of collaboration, meaning that if there might be, for example, also comments on your translation, I'm not agree on. So if this might be by a colleague who's not collaborating with us, Because of course, I mean, we know our community because we're a rather small community, but there might be a professor sitting in Copenhagen and say, no, I'm not agreeing on what my colleague is translating. We would include this comment in the database under, for example, the name. If also, for example, there might be a master's student sitting in Cairo at the American University, for example, I'm not aware of this. And he said, listen, I work on a certain group of your papyri because we have open data. This means everybody can study our papyri since they're in the database. And he said, listen, I did this kind of thesis, and would you like to include my work on this in your database? So of course we would double check in this case in order to have some kind of correctness. But in this case, absolutely. This means the circle of users is absolutely, it has to be extended. Absolutely. So this is right now, again, of course, we started with a defined group because I started the work already with a collaborative group. But what you do not see is that it's already getting bigger. So it's already getting bigger due to interest by other scholars. And so this is actually not really just restricted to Egyptologists, or we talk also about Demotic papyri, Coptic papyri. So what we also have there, Arabic papyri. And absolutely, I'm actually searching for collaborators who are interested in not just working on the papyri, but really would like to encode in database. Because this is what goes back to what I said in the beginning. I talk about isolated scholars. I still send hundreds of images via WeTransfer to colleagues because they're using them for their thesis, for their kind of work. This means we give out information, and we're happy to doing it. But I would be likewise happy if scholars would come back to me to say, listen, I published this, or I translated this kind of text. Would you like to include this in the database? And this is something which I think, of course, here in this ambiente of digital humanities, this is really what we are looking for. But it's still, at least in Egyptology, that scholars or colleagues are still not having a little bit afraid of encoding the data also online. So this means it's not, I mean, to publish online, like in the Revista, is already a little bit strange for us still, because it's not a book publication, although we are a little bit more familiar with online articles. But to have the second step, to encode data in a platform, which is always a little bit tricky with how you can cite the database, because of course I have a section where it's about the intellectual property, how you should cite the translation done by colleagues. But this is actually what scholars are afraid is, how can you assure that somebody is quoting my translation under my name when I present this in your database? And this is really something which I think it's really difficult how to provide this kind of security. And this is why, again, I'm absolutely, and this would really call like, give me text, encode text. Everything is encoded under the name of the author. But of course, how to assure the citation and the property, this is a problem which I still really don't know how to solve this.
Well, this is an open question in the community today,
Yeah.
But there are also, well, we don't have definitive answers and solutions, but we already have methods and standards for that. I see that, for example, you use CC licenses, and these licenses are today important especially for digital data. So this is a way to attribute the work to an editor. And then I see that in any case, the name of an editor is mentioned. So today there are ways for preserving these aspects, for attributing a single reading of the text, the encoding, to a specific scholar, and adding other translations and contributions. So today there are really concrete solutions. Of course, they have to be implemented, and there are also other problems because we are still used to a traditional world where we published printed papers or printed books. But so thank you for mentioning this, because this is fundamental, but I see that you are working in this direction. So I think really this is important. Yes, please, Gabby.
Saying to people who are concerned about that is that I think people who are going to cite translations off your database would rather cite the original translator than say this is from TPOP in their footnote, because my experience of websites that reproduce printed publications, for example, is that when people cite them, you can't tell that they cited the website at all. When people are citing papyri.info, they cite the print publication behind it, unless it's something that's never been published in print. People pretend that they didn't use the website at all. So, you know, I think actually that if someone's name is on that translation, that's what's going to get cited anyway.
Exactly, and this is what my concern is. This is really what my concern is, because in this case, I mean, the Musée Egyptien is a private foundation. However, we have the collection is a state collection, so this means I really in this case, of course, if I prefer if an inventory number, if a manuscript is correctly cited, but for me, really, my main concern is that the colleague who is putting his mind, his research in the database is quoting it. For example, what I do as a curator, I encode, I provide all the technical information, but this is not cited under my name. So this is also not cited under Musée Egyptien. So this is something what we provide as a state or private foundation this way. So we provide those basic information, and this is something which is given by us. However, all kind of research, really researchers, and we all are researchers, is providing an extra level. So this means I'm absolutely happy if my colleague is quoted, because if you really start research, you see, okay, he did this translation and this platform. So in the end, it will go back somehow to the Turin collection. But actually, this is right. Although we provide, of course, we have the stable URL. So we have the document ID number, we have the object ID numbers. And if people are quoting our papyri, especially online publications, I would be happy if they would link this, if they not just quote the inventory number, but if they would link this. But again, this is something I cannot, I cannot really say this, you are obliged to do this. So it would be nice. But again, as you said, really the quotation, but this is actually the problem, and Franziska knows as well, is what the colleagues from the Thesaurus, for example, also have. I mean, from the Thesaurus Lingua, that they provide not just translation, they provide complete philological editions, some of the colleagues. And sometimes I can see by my students that they use the Thesaurus without quoting this. And this is really something, this is the same, and especially the Berlin colleagues working with this problematic for more than 15 years, that they put really their research, their work in it, and it's not really quoted. And but really, this is really something I would prefer to work in this direction. So really, my concern is really the intellectual property of the researchers there, and it's not the Turin objects as it is, because again, we are open data. I mean, everybody can work on this. Yeah.
I mean, we have two separate issues as well, don't we? Which is, one is the legal requirement.
Yeah.
Right? It's your copyright, or it's their copyright. It has
exactly
licenses attached to it, which waives some of that copyright, but does not waive the need to give you attribution for it, for example. Various legal requirements. But on the other side, we have academic practice, which usually is even better. So if something is public domain, we still have to cite the author as academics. Yeah. Legally, we don't have to. Right? So there's slightly different sets of rules for both. And then there's academic. So there's what academic practice should be, and then there's what academics actually do, which is much slower to change, and it's much harder to dictate that. And I don't know what I mean, except for putting next to every single piece of data, saying this piece of data is copyright the Museo Egizio and Susanne Töpfer and someone else, and hope that someone will notice and cite it that way. Because we're also not going to sue an academic for footnoting us wrongly.
No, exactly. Yeah, exactly. So this is why it's really more about the how do you call this, the agreement. I mean, this is really more the let's say more like a gentleman agreement. This is something you should know how to follow this kind of rules. But this is still that, and this is interesting that we are in the 21st century talking about digital data, etc. But still, we are going back of this kind of. It's really it's not very well, or as you said, it's difficult to define this. It's still that really you have to put the energy a little bit on character in a way, right? And
Yes, exactly. So thank you very much really for this final discussion, because these are fundamental things, and I think, Susanne, that you will be invited again because you put so many interesting questions starting from your database. So I hope that in the future, for our next semesters, you will be able maybe to join us again to go on with this discussion, because you are really doing this work. But now, unfortunately, our time is over, and so we have to end here. And speaking of the future, okay, this was our last session for this semester, but Sunoikis Digital Classics is going on, as you know, and we will have another semester in the fall, and so we will add the program soon. We start, so Gabby, I don't know if you want to add something. I can only say now that we will start on October 7th. And oh, sorry, it's my, okay, Susanne is, and so we will start, we will follow I have to say, the London and the German academic calendars, and we will start on October 7th, which is also the first week of German classes. But Gabby, if you want to say just something about next semester.
Only that we will, as you said, for the dates, we'll be following the union of our two academic calendars, and for the content, it'll be sort of an intersection of our academic needs. So we'll be talking about some approaches to digital linguistics and philology. We'll be talking about some approaches to text encoding and text annotation and other ways of enhancing texts and ways of finding texts. And because the German semester continues after the new year in January and February, and in London we have a second semester with a complete different program, so I'll be talking more about cultural heritage related features, 3D, geographic, and also the legal and ethical applications of digital humanities from January onwards. So there may be a bit more of an intersection between the Leipzig content and not. The Sunoikis, of course, Sunoikis Digital Classics is not just what we teach in London and what we teach in Leipzig. It is, you know, there are now on the map of contributors to Sunoikis Digital Classics, there are now 100 institutions represented. So we have, you know, we have a much larger union of content there. So there will be a very rich and diverse content in the next.
Yes, absolutely. And we have a Google map. So if you go to our website, you can see the Google map. So, and this is, okay, the occasion to thank not only today Susanne and Franziska for this wonderful session about digital Egyptology, really thank you, but also to thank our guests in this semester, in the past semester, the audience, our students, people who join us every week, who write their question in the chat, and then who follow us also later after the live session. So really, okay, so thank you all. Stay tuned because we are working on the program and we will soon publish the program for next semester. Okay, here it is, Gabby. Thank you very much. So here is our Google map for Sunoikis Digital Classics, just to see how many people have been contributing to the program. We started in 14-15, the academic year 14-15, and now so we have quite a map. Okay, yes, and you can see we have many institutions with students also producing data and colleagues presenting their work. Yeah, so you can see, and okay, the institutions. Okay, but now really I have to end the session. So really, thank you very much, and see you next semester. Okay, I wish you a great summer. Bye, bye, ciao.
Thank you, bye.